Hi guys, my name is Hrithik, and this is the first episode in a series of videos where I'm going to be sitting down with students, professors, and industry professionals. And I'm going to be talking about and discussing their experience in the software industry. So for the first episode, we have Tolu, who's an ex-product design intern at Facebook, and he's also the president of SESA. So let's get on with it. Tolu, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Hrithik.
All right, let's start with a simple question. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, again, super excited to be here. This is like a really awesome initiative. I'm so glad that this is happening. So a little bit about myself. I'm a 3.5-year software engineering student at the University of Ottawa. I'm the president of the Software Engineering Students Association. I'm a designer, I'm an engineer, stress student just like everybody else. And more specifically, I'm a product designer, so that's kind of where a lot of my interests lie and where I'm building a career in right now. And outside of all of that, I try to teach design through Design Talks Ottawa here on campus.
So what was the process of getting your internship, and how many companies did you apply to? What was like your application to interview ratio? What was the stress like? How did you manage that? What was the interview process like, and what was your actual internship like?
So technically my first internship was in high school, but that one was pretty random. I think we went to a school, so I'll talk about that really quickly. We went to a school field trip to U of T. I met a professor there. I think I'd taken a class. It was a field trip where you took a class for a day. And I'll tell that story because I learned something really interesting there. So I took a class for a day, and I took this class in business for startups. And so I went into this class. At the time, I had been reading a lot of stuff about how to build startups, how to build companies, how to build products. From this place called Y Combinator. They're they're an incubator in Silicon Valley. So I'd read a lot about them, and so when I got to this I was probably 16 at the time, 17 maybe, and I went into this class, and eventually a lot of what he was saying, it just made sense to me. Eventually the class was just me and him talking the entire time, and 20 other people listening to us talk. And at the end he was like, "That's really cool," and I told him I'm looking for an internship. And then long and short, he referred me to my first internship. That's kind of how that went. And then they got on the phone with me. I spoke to them. I was like, "Yeah, I'm in high school," and they were like, "Totally, just come on over." And they did that for my first summer internship, 2 months, nothing crazy. So coming to university, as you know, with our program, you do your first year, and then you got to go look for your first internship. Now, having done those before, and I knew, okay, I wanted to do something fun. I wanted to do something I actually enjoyed. And so I needed to start early. And so I started my search for my internships first semester.
Is that because that's when the California companies start recruiting?
I actually didn't start applying to California companies until my second year. So at that time wasn't even clued into the California cycle yet. Until my second year. So my first year, I was like, okay, what would be a great private sector? Because here in Ottawa, a big thing is your first internship is in government. That's everybody always. I've never worked in government actually. I'm really, I wouldn't say fortunate, but in my mind, I never wanted to work in government, and so far I haven't had to do that. So to me, that's some level of fortune. So, anyways, I started early because I knew I wanted to work in private sector, and also I knew that my competition wasn't going to be fellow first years. My competition was third years and second years. That's what the competition was, and that's probably the first mind shift I had to make. I was like, okay, I needed to make this mental change. And then in terms of applications, I actually didn't apply to a lot of places now that I remember, because I was starting so early. It's probably the first time I learned about back channeling, the idea of kind of hustling your way into the process before the process actually starts. And a lot of interesting things that happen around first semester, second semester before the summer. I used to do a lot of I just look out for interesting events happening and things that would allow me to essentially insert myself into those spaces and then go from there, figure it out. So I remember this is also in the dead of winter, because Ottawa winter starts early. So there's a lot of times I was just like skipping. I skipped a lot of classes to go. Like I did startup open house here in Ottawa. It's a really interesting thing that happens where like you get to tour startups, and then obviously like try to pitch yourself and get a job. Like basically that's the point. I did that. I applied to Shopify. They opened in January, so I applied to Shopify. Got to interview with Shopify. And then my first internship was actually at Clipfolio, and they're a data visualization company here in Ottawa. And actually, how I got that internship wasn't by applying. So SESA, back when I was a first year, before I joined the exec team and all that fun stuff, we do these open houses where we go to companies' offices, hang out with them, that kind of thing. So I saw Clipfolio was doing that. Obviously, doing school hours, I was like, class. Never heard of her. So I skipped class as usual, went to this Clipfolio open. I'm not encouraging skipping class, but I did what I had to do. So I went to this Clipfolio open house, and for some reason it was like the middle of the day or something. It was like not after work hours. Yeah. So because like you don't want to like go to an empty office. So went to this Clipfolio open house, and then basically like I took a copy of my resume, went in there and just started like talking to people. I remember at the time talking to like their engineers, the CTOs, and just kind of saying like, I'm looking for an internship. And I want to stress, I didn't just go into that process just like, here's me, I'm looking for an internship, give me something. At the time, I'd also been doing I also discovered the power of side projects really early. And the fact that like, if you want to get noticed, a really great way to do that is side projects, and a really great way. And the reason is because what a side project does is it gives you something to talk about, one, and it gives them a way to assess you when you don't have anything on your resume. And so for me, like I kind of had things on my resume, but ultimately not the kind of things that would like put me above and beyond a second year or third year. So I was probably maybe I could compete with my fellow first years, but probably not even better than them. I could just compete, but I couldn't. There was no guarantee that I could actually beat them in an interview. Yeah. So for sure I couldn't beat second and third year. So I needed something else. I needed another thing. And that was the time I started working on my first side project. My first side project was actually super dumb, nothing crazy. What I did was actually I started working with APIs at that time and discovering that hey, you don't have to code everything. Sometimes they're like external softwares that have built certain things, you can just plug them into your software, into what you're building. Okay. So at the time, what I essentially built was a project. It was supposed to be a Chrome extension, but I settled for just a website. And it would take a picture of your face, analyze the emotion on it, and then respond with a GIF. Pretty straightforward. And so that was using two APIs, the Gifify API, the Jiffy API. The project was called Gifify, but it was using the Jiffy API and the Clarify API. So Clarify is a company that uses, essentially, they are an AI company. Okay. They've built models around how to understand different things. Like they do logos, like shoes, so you can plug that into other systems. Okay. So they'd already mapped or built a system for like emotion or like facial recognition, essentially. Yeah. So you don't have to go train a data set. So you don't have to go write the code around that. You can just plug into their system. So that's kind of what I did. So they had written one. They basically allowed me to train one. And even for training, they actually provide a really interesting like UI for that. So you just put stuff up and you can like manually just like this is what it means. And then you run the system again with a new data set. And if it's like mapping it correctly, then your data set, then your model is being trained. So I used those two things, combined them together, built a really crappy UI and said, hey, like, can I do three things? Can I take a picture from a webcam, send that picture to Clarify, from Clarify get some response of what the emotion is, and then append and this is literally what the code was doing. I append that emotion string to, I believe it was like an animal of some kind, like a random animal in an array. So I just created an array of random animals like dog, cat, duck, and I would pick a random animal from that array, append it, so we would get happy duck or happy dog or happy cat or angry duck, and then send that string as a query back to Jiffy, and then return back a GIF. That was pretty much my first side project. But what it did was demonstrate this ability to work with APIs, demonstrate an ability to understand like how do you make API calls, so it was a really interesting project in that sense, and it was that project that actually got me my first Clipfolio internship, and actually also got me my interview at Shopify as well. I didn't get an offer, but it was pretty cool to get an interview in my first year.
So I wanted to understand, you said that you're into UI, UX and product design. So I want to understand how you went from web dev into product design, and what kind of inspires you to make cool products.
So yeah, like my first internship, at Clifolia was as an engineer. I worked as a UI engineer there. I think that's what I was called. I think it was like UI or UX. The reason why it was so strange is actually because there was something peculiar about that internship. Okay. So normally when you're hired as an engineer for an internship, you join the engineering team, and you're just a rank and file engineer. But what was interesting about that internship, and something I forgot to mention about Clifolia as well, was I did the open house. Yeah. But then my first contact with Clifolia was actually a lecture series that they had on campus that naturally I also skipped class for. You'll start to see a trend. I didn't go to a lot of classes in my first year. I went to some, but most of them I just skipped them. So it was a lecture series by the chief experience officer at the company, Peter Matthews. And so Peter Matthews had, I don't remember how or why I found out about that lecture he was having, but I skipped class and went to that lecture series. I think at the time the rationale was like, this is somebody who works at a company that's private. I'm gonna go and maybe like try and wow him and see what happens. That was kind of what I was thinking. I was like, this is somebody like I would usually have to book a meeting for, but like now they're like on campus, and it's either that or like I go to a Java class. I think I'll go to that one. That's kind of my rationale. So I went to that, and long and short was I told him at the end of that lecture series, I want to work on your team. And that was kind of what I said. And then fast forward to maybe a week later, then SESA has that event. I'm in the office again. He's like, I saw you last week. And I'm like, here we are. And then we're kind of building that relationship over time. And so when I joined the company as an intern, I actually joined the company to his team. And his team was a team of designers. And so I was an engineer embedded on the design team. And what was really interesting too about that was at the time the company they were like not in the new office, they were in their older office. And they were like taking up some floors, and the engineering team was on the lower floor, and design was on the upper floor. So I was also physically separated from the engineers at the company. So what it created was a really interesting like experience over 4 months where I got to do a lot of engineering work, which now I realize is just prototyping work, because a lot of the work I did was I would take stuff, I was still squashing bugs, a lot of like UI bugs, but I spent a lot of time with their designers, spent a lot of time in their space. I spent a lot of time like I would be in their meetings and in their scrums and all like how they were figuring that stuff out. And I got to like figure that out. And I was like, okay, this seems really interesting. And then on my off time, I'd pick up like Adobe XD or like some other design tools and like try to mess around in that for a bit. And I would show it to them and they're like, this is really interesting. And I think I did a lecture at a time that you do every day, you can do a lecture. And I think I did one where I did an audit of Adobe XD for the team and said like, this is what Adobe XD does, this is what it doesn't do. And like, here's why I think we should use it or we shouldn't use it. I don't remember what my recommendation was. But that entire experience, I think, probably sowed the seed of like the designer I am today. Because after that experience, this is end of August 2017, I believe. I decided, hey, I'm gonna try and be a designer. Like it was just really like my rationale was, there's no other time to try that but now. I'm just finishing my first year. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out and I get some last ditch engineering job. Or it does work out and I see what happens. So I then spent 6 months from August 2017 to the end of 2017 basically trying to be a designer and trying to learn design. And what that really looked like for me was basically going to classes by day, because I started going to classes by that time. I was like, I can't keep skipping classes. And then I was a designer by night, and that I was doing projects in Adobe XD, a lot of really crap work. But essentially rinsing and repeating like a learning cycle that I had created for myself with just like side projects. I really learned best by side projects, just like honestly my learning style. So I created these like mini side projects that I would just iterate through, each time learning something new every time. So I did a project with a friend of mine where we did a hiking app. Then I did a bunch of other like random stuff here and there. But then eventually towards the end of the year, I launched my first case study called Spotify Jam Room. And that project was really interesting. It took off a little bit, cut through the noise. It really raised my profile slightly. And then when that project launched, it actually allowed me to get my first internship at Pilot Interactive in Toronto, a design agency.
Okay.
And over that time too, I'd actually been interviewing at a lot of like, that was actually my first time interviewing at Bay Area companies. Ironically, it was as a designer, not as an engineer. And of course I got a lot of no's in that process as well. But it was also kind of validating that I could get the interviews. It was like, holy, wait a second, you actually think I'm good enough for an interview? Maybe I'm not so bad at this. And so basically that's pretty much a condensed story of how I went from like engineer on a design team at Folio to interaction design intern at Pilot Interactive.
Okay. So I know a lot of people want to get into UI UX design. I feel that you should have a good understanding of web dev, kind of understand how things can be done in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So what do you think people really need to get into design?
I think definitely there is something to be said about understanding the tools in which what we design are being created in, kind of similar to how like a lot of industrial designers or fashion designers have an understanding of like cloth or have an understanding of like wood, whatever it is you build stuff in. I think it's important for a lot of designers to understand what we build in, but I think more importantly, I think more importantly, what's important for a lot of designers or people trying to come into design is obviously like product thinking. So your ability to like understand who's a problem, who's a product for, who's it not for, what are their constraints, and what are their needs, and really try to like center that in your process. Two, I think it's a really cool skill to have is understanding like user research, maybe at a more fundamental level. You don't need to be the best user researcher, but I think understanding at a fundamental level allows you to answer some of the questions yourself if you don't have a user researcher, and making sure that your work is backed up with some facts and some data. I think ultimately a product designer is it's actually more like an engineer than they are like an artist. I think product design is based in function. There can still be art in it, but art is an enabler of something, not the end in and of itself. And so I would say if you're somebody coming into UI UX design, have an understanding of product thinking, have an understanding of user research, but of course, like, you know, you have to do that work of trying to understand how do I get my design sensibilities up, consume a lot of work, look at stuff, be more critical about like the apps on your phone, be more critical about the systems around you, and say like, why is this way? Like this app I'm using in front of me, like why is it that way? And trying to reverse engineer, constantly reverse engineering, eventually you start to like what you'll hit is you start seeing some commonalities, like these apps are doing kind of the same things, and then you go one level up, you start to see a principle. And then you kind of rinse and repeat that over and over again. Eventually you hit on a lot of principles, and then you can then reapply those principles in your own work. That's for like UX principles, and the same thing goes for UI principles as well. There's a bunch of them, and then all of that coalesces together once you get your design sensibilities together. You kind of just have a taste for what's good, like what looks like a design, and that really just comes with time and with consuming work and seeing a lot of good work as well. But in terms of more like concrete stuff, I think like there's a lot of great courses on Udacity, a lot of great courses on Coursera. Medium has a lot of great
like case studies.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Exactly, case studies, reading case studies. I think that's one thing I did a lot. I read a lot of case studies, and then from there asked a lot of questions. Cold emailing. I think I cold emailed a lot of people with questions around like the work they did, and said, hey, how did you do this? Or like, this is a decision you made. Why did you make that decision? And what is some of the stuff informing like how you're thinking? I don't know if those people like remember me today, but like I did a lot of that too. So like reading a lot of case studies, and I think like maybe we'll like link some of that stuff later. Sure. I can send that to you, but it's like, yeah, I think Coursera, Udacity will teach you some of that like fundamental like design stuff, but then like case studies, and then I cannot overstate just like doing work, just get stuff out of there. I think a lot of people like wait till they're perfect to start doing stuff, and I think that's probably the wrong way to go about it. That's just my opinion though. I think like you just got to get things out of there and like get the crap stuff out of the way, so you can start getting to good stuff. And the only way to get the crap stuff out of the way is to get it out on there, whether it's get it on paper, get it in Sketch or Figma or whatever tool you decide to use, but get it out there. So I think if I were to wrap it up, it's understand your product thinking, understand your user research. You can get some learnings in Coursera and Udacity, read a lot of case studies, and then just do a lot of work.